I have heard from many of you who have concerns about the reopening of schools in Puerto Rico, specifically schools that are not being reopened at the current time. So I asked the Secretary of Education, Julia Keleher, who is in her first school year as a secretary, to join us to answer some questions, and she has agreed to do so. Ma'am, thank you for your time. First of all, you probably have heard some of the concerns that parents have. Many of them that I'm hearing from are saying, hey, listen, my child's school is ready to open, and some people are saying everything from there's either incompetence at the state level or there's a conspiracy to keep the school closed. First of all, I would ask how you respond to that.
I think there's no. It's clear to me there's no conspiracy, and I would disagree that there's incompetence in terms of how education is managing the process. Um, we announced an original timeline for opening schools the second week of October, and that we said that we were going to open two regions on the 23rd, which was last week. We opened schools in Mayagüez and San Juan. This week we opened schools in Ponce and Bayamon, and next week we were going to open the remainder. We started on October 12th working to classify the schools that we had into categories of red, yellow, or green, whether depending on the degree to which they suffered some damage. We shared that schedule with the Army Corps of Engineers and with CSA, who's the company that also has engineers that's helping with the structural reviews. Those resources were assigned to us to conduct the reviews. They went out the week of the 16th. We wanted to have the majority of the schools done for San Juan and Mayagüez in that end of that first week. I became extremely frustrated with the process on that for the Thursday of that first week. I asked for additional resources. I indicated that the process could not continue as it was currently being executed. We made a formal request for additional engineering resources. We looked for volunteers who could help us in either of those two regions because the information wasn't flowing, and we weren't moving as quickly as we needed to. So that was the 18th, I think, of October. We opened the school the week of the 23rd, continued to make requests for additional resources. Tuesday and on Monday, the 30th, we opened the 30 schools in Ponce and Bayamon. I think the problem has been there's a lack of access to information, and there's a lack of access to information that I'm experiencing as well. So Tuesday night, I received the first set of the first version of the database that has all of the findings. We met with the Association of the Teachers Association here in Puerto Rico. We indicated we would share that information with them and ask them to help disseminate it because the information is not flowing and people don't understand why their schools aren't being open, which I totally get because the information isn't getting to me and I can't make a decision based upon that. Having received the information, we have a new challenge. That new challenge is there's black and white evidence that someone went to a school and said, oh, you have mold. Oh, you have fallen cables. So as the Secretary of Education, I'm now faced with this moral responsibility of safeguarding the well-being of the students and the teachers who report and work in those buildings. So how do we find a way around this? Between Monday and Wednesday, we came up with a strategy of saying, okay, we're going to push all of the information out. We're going to post it. We're demanding it from the people who have been conducting the inspections. It's now available on the webpage I can send you a link to so that you can see all of the findings that have been reported. And what I'm asking the school directors to do is to write a letter that says, okay, I received the engineer's report. I understand that you said that 50% of the roof is missing and in this area, and that there's mold in this area, and that there's debris in this area. And in order to respond to those risks and to those physical hazards in the space, the school will do 1, 2, and 3. The director sends me and I've notified my school community. And once everyone's informed and they're aware of the conditions into which they're going to either work or send their children to be cared for and educated, then I think schools can open them. And I've complied with my responsibility for making informed decisions, erring on the side of safety, and that we can reopen. But I need to put all that in the context of the fact that we're not really late because no one intended for the schools to be open and functioning before that first full week of November. Because remember, it was the first two in the week of the 23rd, Mayagüez and San Juan, then Ponce and Bayamon, which we did open some, and then the remaining next week. With this new strategy and people being able to sort of self-certify and say, okay, I agree, I understand, we think that we should be able to be around 80% operational next week.
When you say self-certify, are you leaving it up to the schools and the school directors to say, "Hey, parents, if you're okay with wires down or mold in the school, we'll still open"? I guess I'm a little confused by the process.
Right. There's a demand right now for me to open schools, and it's I am unable to open a school if I am unsure of the physical conditions of that school. I need someone to tell me it is a safe place for kids to go and for teachers to work. And that process is a good process. That is an appropriate, responsible way of executing my duties. The issue has been it's been too slow. We needed more resources, and the information isn't flowing. In that context, you have people in the streets protesting, open my school, there's nothing wrong with it. And it may be that there's nothing wrong with it. The challenge there is I don't have that data, and so I can't give it a green light because I don't have the information. I have the database now. We can update our list of greens. And in the meantime, if there are schools that think that they're fine no matter what, but I have evidence to the contrary, for example, mold is a health concern. Fallen wires, if at some point the electricity comes back and they begin to flip around and a kid is standing next to it, that kid could get electrocuted. If something blows off the roof because it's not sufficiently secured and it falls on the head of a child, then they're making for the rest of their life. I can't have that on my conscience. That's one thing. So I need to be responsible in terms of understanding the conditions into which I'm asking people to go, irrespective of what any other actor would choose to do, because I'm the secretary, and at the end of the day, it stops with me. And we have a different situation where there was a problem. People knew there was a problem. They called their brother, their cousin, their friend, and somebody came and patched the roof. That's great. That's all well and good until the point where something happens, the patch doesn't hold, something falls and it hurts a kid, or it falls and a teacher gets injured. Who's gonna be the person that gets the court papers to go report for negligence? Right? Is no one going to be responsible for that? Or does the person who came to do the helping out understand that they're incurring the liability for making that repair? And then apart from that, as all of these things get fixed and we violate the entirety of the organized process that FEMA has laid out for us to be able to identify and document and cost out the amount of repairs that we would need to do so that we can ask for federal funding for that, all of that goes out the window too, because people are just fixing stuff according to the rules and the order in which they want to do things. So by and large, it's a problem. But in that context, if they want to open, then your option is you have to say you're fully aware of the risks that you're exposing yourself to and you're exposing other people to, and you believe you've taken sufficient cautionary measures.
I get that, but let's say, for example, there's a school where you've heard that there's mold, but if they come back to you and say, no, we think we took care of it, it appears to be okay. At that point, do you send your own state investigators or your Commonwealth investigators to verify it, or do you just take the word of the school staff and open the school?
I am not taking the word of the school staff for that the remediation is complete or effective. I am taking the documentation and the evidence of the principal for having notified that they've closed off the room or they've denied access or whatever, and then we have two entities, whether it's Edificios Públicos, the public buildings, or OMEB, who are responsible for the maintenance of that building. And then they need to go out and we need to figure out how to do that. But we have to do that according to the rules and the procedures and the guidelines that FEMA has identified so that those become recoverable costs. Because if anybody wasn't aware, we have a fiscal crisis here that we had well before the hurricane. And so I'm not really sure where this money that was never budgeted for to cover these expenses that were never anticipated is supposed to come from.
Who is the delay you talk about in terms of certifying that these schools are safe to open? Who's in charge of going out there and doing it? I mean, who's behind the delay? Where is that coming from?
So there are two entities that have been working in collaboration, and this was coordinated not through the Department of Education, but through sort of the FEMA's liaison with the government of Puerto Rico, and they assigned us the Army Corps of Engineers and a company called CSA. And those two organizations, we passed them on October 12th, we gave them the entirety of the list of our schools with the damages that our own people had reported to us and said, please go make sure these buildings are structurally sound. I need them in 2 buckets. Can open, can't open. And from there, we've been depending on them, despite my frustration as of the 18th, and despite my repeated requests from the 18th moving forward for additional resources so that we could move quicker.
So this is FEMA again.
But at the end of the day, if I'm going to be responsible for something and people are going to criticize me, I am okay with being criticized for erring on the side of being concerned about the safety and well-being of the 345,000 kids that parents are entrusting to me. I take that responsibility extremely seriously, and I think for 4 days or for 5 days, and I'm still inside my original timeline, I'm okay being criticized for that, because I'm making sure that the future and the life and the well-being of a child isn't at risk.
So again, just circling back to the last question, it's a branch of FEMA that's doing all that checklist business for you.
Yeah, it's a group. It's a resource that was identified and assigned to the department through an agreement between FEMA and the government of Puerto Rico.
Understood. How many schools on the island are currently open?
Open and authorized is one thing, because the number of schools that we've approved and said the engineer report indicates that there's no danger to anyone is 155 in the 4 regions. That's about 10% of the total schools. Through this process of self-certification, we should be able to get to the remaining, 80%. They're telling me 45 buildings that are not structurally sound. So we know, at least right now, with 55% of the schools evaluated, we have 44 that they're not going to be able to open. And can I share something else?
Sure.
This conversation is being confused with a secondary conversation that we're having about the size of the public school system and the operational costs, and the fact that without the government generating the revenues it normally does, that has the potential to impact my budget monthly at around $150 million. I have 14,000 students, estimating from what was reported for one region of students who have left. I have 250 teachers that are asking for emergency transfers, which mean they want to go to different schools because they can't. It's too hard for them to get to the schools they used to go to. And then I have teachers that left the island. So in that context, I have to look critically about how I'm going to make sure I optimize the use of available funds, and in some instances, I may need to consolidate schools, it's a different conversation that seems to be happening at the same time. And so I think where some of the hysteria around "don't close my school," it's sort of we're conflating 2 different issues. But I'll share another statistic with you. I pulled the data set of there are almost 200 schools in Puerto Rico that have less than 150 students. One of those schools has 72 students, and it has a budget of $500,000. And I calculated what's the percentage of that $500,000 that goes to payroll. And what do you think that number is?
I don't know, but you'll tell us.
92%. That leaves approximately a little less than $50,000 for anything I might want or need to buy for a student. And the question to the public would be, how long do we expect to be able to sustain that, given the financial implications that the hurricane will have on an already stressed system? And I think when you look at that, the responsible thing to do is to consolidate resources to provide a better quality of education for the students.
How many schools do you expect to close?
I don't know yet, but and I'm all about sharing the numbers, right? I'm going to put the data out there. I'm sharing with the local media, and we can look at that. And the public should have a conversation, should have an honest conversation. I don't need to close any schools immediately or make that decision, but I would like to know what people think about those numbers and how those resources are allocated.
How many teachers have left the island since the storm?
I don't have any way of tabulating that just yet because a lot of the states that were willing to receive them didn't ask for their certificates immediately. They allowed emergency certificates, so I'm not getting requests for information. For students, I saw files, which thank you, my big thanks to CCSSO and U.S. Department of Education for their help with the student tracking project and our little briefcase idea. We had about 600 that went to Georgia, 200 that went to Pennsylvania, and like a couple thousand. I have to double check the number. I want to say it was like 3,000 that went to Massachusetts. I don't have numbers for New York City yet and Florida, but that's probably a bigger number. But I didn't expect so many to be in Massachusetts.
So how many percentage-wise of the student population do you believe you have lost?
It's about 5%. And it's concerning because if it is that 14,000 number, well, because we had one region, Macau, that reported that they had about 1,500 students that showed transactions in a system. When we're not online, it's very hard to get this data through your data system. But they had individual principals report about 1,500, a little more than that, requests for transfers, students exiting the system. And people here are saying, that again, these arguments all get conflated. Oh, well, people are leaving because you're not opening the schools. I mean, again, for 4 days, you're going to make a life decision to pick up and leave and move your entire family and your house and your family and your job and whatever and start over somewhere because the school didn't open for 4 days is a little hard for me. So, but these trends are already out there. That number of 14,000, that was independent of what's happening this week. So, anyway, overall, I think what we're going to see, though, is at the end of the year, that would be almost twice the number of students that annually leave the system. Usually we see a reduction of 20,000.
Thank you for your time. We will come back to you with more questions in the future, but thank you for answering these.
Sure. Thank you for the opportunity.